Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to welcome back Gardner Barrier from Gardner Barrier Consulting. Gardner came on the pod, maybe a month or two ago, and we had this conversation about the business side of independent schools and the value of leaning into those principles before you become a head of school, and just how so much of that work is essentially being a CEO of a school and like very complicated portfolio. And so I want to kind of continue to pull the thread on this idea of portfolios and portfolio management. And Gardner and I were talking the other day about this idea of like risk mitigation and thinking where you make your bets as an institution, and just knew that this was going to make for a really interesting podcast conversation. So we're going to dig into it in just a second. But before we do that, Gardner Barrier, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Great to be back. And as Peter said, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I think the conversation we last had, where we'll get to share this, I hope it's useful to people. And like you said, when you have the responsibility to lead a complex organization, there's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of risk management involved, and this portfolio notion of how you manage your portfolio and the different moving parts and different kind of business entities or business units within that portfolio. It's a lot to carry, and that's what I enjoy doing professionally, is just helping and supporting people to be their best, to put their best foot forward in their leadership roles. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me back, Peter.
No, of course, anytime. And I think that if somebody didn't hear our earlier episode, can you just take a second to introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So as Peter said, I went super creative with the naming convention. And so my name being Gardner Barrier, I got really creative and tagged a consulting third word there. So Gardner Barrier Consulting. And interestingly enough, I probably do more coaching and then like advising or thought partnership than actual consulting. I love the relationships I get to build with people that are in leadership within schools and in nonprofit business spaces. So I love that I've been a independent school person for a long time. I love that I've worked with a range of schools over that time. And I love that I get to help leaders now as a person that's sat in various seats and just enjoys coming alongside someone to really be a thought partner and a resource to help make decisions and be intentional with their leadership.
And I'm guessing one of the conversations that you have is around helping leaders kind of reshape this idea that this concept of expense versus investment, right? Like, yes, it's an expense, but also potentially you could think about it as an investment. So I'm in your mind, why does that distinction matter? And do you find that boards are like, which way are boards typically looking at expense versus investment?
Good question. I think a lot of uncertainties in the system right now, generally, right? Just our world has a lot of uncertainty. And my point in this distinction is expense sounds deficit. And a lot of the things that you're spending money on really are better categorized as investments, because the reason you're spending money on them is the return, whether that's direct revenue or indirect revenue from the sense of how it affects culture. A lot of these decisions, they even can have direct return, direct financial return. But my point is, if you're going to spend, X number of dollars on something at, your organization, you're not just throwing it down the well. You're getting a return on that investment in a way that you don't get a return on an expense. So I just think that mindset helps of why are you making this allocation of funds? Because you expect there to be a return. And to me, it takes you into this portfolio managing mindset of you're managing risk and you're making investments across your portfolio such that overall the portfolio has a positive return, as in you're running a school that can be sustained. And some, again, that's where I get into that direct revenue, indirect revenue, that if you're spending money on the, I'll just make this up, but it's one I have firsthand experience with. If you're spending money on your lobby, your welcome lobby, Well, no one's paying you $5, a minute to sit there while they wait, but it sets a better first impression. So I would argue there is a indirect positive revenue return on that investment. So you're not just updating the welcome lobby because you wanted to just light money on fire. You're expecting there to be a return on that investment. So that to me just puts you in a frame of it takes money to make money, and you need to manage your portfolio where you make decisions such that anything you greenlit you thought would be a good investment. That doesn't mean they're going to end up being good investments, but that's where you have a portfolio, and across the portfolio, you've made good investments.
Dig into the portfolio. When you talk about portfolio within the context of running a school, like what does that mean to you?
Great. So even as we talk about the biggest revenue stream for schools, tuition, even that, looking at it in kind of segments. So if you've got, I don't know, 3 divisions of your school or something, there's these 3 segments of tuition revenue, or if you wanted to go by grade or something, but like even that you can kind of subdivide and look at, where are we soft? Okay, again, I'm just kind of going with hypotheticals. We know we kind of underprice our lower grades because we want to retain them for our wherever you're seeing the strategy of your pricing
Yep.
that lets you have a loss leader and then the margin somewhere else. And then beyond that, beyond tuition, okay, how's this came out of like investment committee kind of stuff. How's the portfolio of the like endowment doing? Okay. And then, how's fundraising doing as a revenue stream? What more schools are going to need to look at and are looking at? What else? Are there other material ways to have to leverage our physical campus, our intellectual property, or whatever for auxiliary revenue or non-traditional revenue, things that aren't in those first kind of 3 parts of the portfolio?
Yeah.
And again, this is where like a metric that I think is important that I hope by saying this is useful to some schools. How tuition dependent do you want to be? That's a fun board level question to grapple with. That it'd be great if schools could be, hard income, great, cool, endowment and these other buckets are above and beyond what we actually need. And some schools are that strong because that's their reality with just what demand looks like and so forth. A lot of schools, that's not reality. So, okay, like for instance, if you budget such that, all right, we need 80% of our revenue to come from tuition. I'm just making up numbers here. But you end up being at 85%. Okay, you didn't get there in terms of hard income, but you had some margin because of the way you modeled it. If you're budgeting where you need to be 100%, you come in at 110. My point is that comes down to portfolio management of what else do you have going on such that if you end up
Right.
3 third graders short because the third grade families were nervous because of, just make up a scenario, you're not putting all your eggs of portfolio management in the tuition revenue and, oh goodness, we see less kindergarten families this year, or less of our 9th graders stuck, 8th to 9th stuck around, or pick a detail.
Yep.
So this is like how to diversify that portfolio by thinking of it more broadly, by having the segments in tuition, but then where I get energized is beyond tuition and what can be, for our last pod, what can be disrupted or thought of differently as far as how do we have the numbers add up in a way that takes some pressure off of tuition revenue or tuition percentage revenue and lets us really deliver our mission and not be as nervous around some variability as it relates to enrollment.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Just a few minutes ago, you mentioned all the assets that you have on campus and thinking about those assets in ways in which, oh, like we can live our mission in different ways by virtue of having these assets. So what I'm guessing is okay, well, we know we've got this one big bucket, this portfolio of tuition revenue, what, 70, 80%, whatever the number may be. Like, and we know that we're going to draw some from endowment. We know we're going to have our annual fund. We may pull a little bit out of our investments. Then there's whatever amount we're generating out of auxiliary, maybe running a summer camp or something like that. But when you think about assets, like, what do you like? You're super creative, so I'm like, where does your mind go when you're looking out at a school and realizing, oh my gosh, like this, there is so much IP, there's so much potential here.
Yeah, this is where you get into the market specific things and knowing your market, knowing your people.
Yeah,
If you have some campus that's got a lot of acreage or something, okay, what does that inform as far as the kind of camps you can have, for instance? If
sure.
you've got incredible staff that are really research oriented, the IP kind of thing. I'll give you an example that I haven't shared with you before. That's just I'm kind of making it up as we go here, back to just creative, but ultimately creating this kind of board conversation and leadership conversation around like what's possible and kind of yes and. So I'll give you this one that probably a lot of schools could do some version of what I'm about to say. And I'm not, maybe some are, I'm not aware of schools doing what I'm about to get into. All right, you use your school from, 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. for classes or whatever. What would it look like if on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, on Tuesdays, you work with the local retirement village and they come over and do like something in the pot on the pottery wheel or in the art room, leverage some facilities that the retirement home doesn't have, where
Yep.
them being able to create would be really healthy and good for the retirees, and being on a campus and having some sort of revenue attached to that. And on Thursdays, you do a wine and watercolor with the parents. Again, I'm totally making all that up.
Yeah.
My point is, what assets do you have? In North Carolina, where I live, with as many homeschool students as there are, how do you leverage your science labs for homeschools to have access to when you're not using them? Whether that's second shift, weekends, whatever. And again, that's just like looking at again your physical campus and saying, in what ways might people use this that aren't full-time students of ours, or another way that our full-time students would use it. When I look at, like, if you go to most campuses and you go to a classroom, just pick one on the campus and you really look at its utilization, it's being used like 22% of the time because it's only being used during the school year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and during the school day. And it's just a question of like for a lot of schools, it's like, rent the gym. Like, what do you have and in what ways can you leverage your assets? Now, you have to be, this is where it gets into investment. And we talked about direct revenue. Well, there's also the cost side of that. So
Sure.
if you're, for instance, if you're renting your gym every Saturday, how does that impact the wear and tear and change? Like, there is a cost to that. So don't get carried away with the top line. There's also cost associated. And that's where it's a yes and of like, what's right there for the taking given the resources you have? Is it some thought leadership and host some conferences or some teacher ed or something like that? Is it, gosh, we've got this big, beautiful field, we should let the local soccer club practice here? Is it, we've got a science lab and these people could use it? Is it after hours art classes that people of other ages or stages could come benefit from? And to me, that's the fun, because at some schools, some of the things I just said wouldn't be worth the trouble in terms of there wouldn't be that much demand or that much revenue. At some schools, there could be huge. Furthermore, with yes and thinking, who are you bringing to campus, and how does that have not only the direct revenue and direct costs that you can process, but how does bringing other groups of people, homeschool groups, retirees, whomever, how might that benefit you? And again, I don't say this in any like kind of manipulative way. It's just honest. If you've got, for instance, homeschool students coming to your campus, somebody might really love what you're doing and end up enrolling. Cool. If you have retirees coming for art class, they might they might really find what they're doing meaningful, and it gave them some real connection in a stage of life where they appreciate that. And you get surprised that they leave you in their will someday. I mean, you just, by leveraging your assets, you can build models that pay for themselves right then and there. The ROI is like immediate, and there's all this like goodwill and community center kind of utility of a way to think about managing the portfolio. And I'll stop talking after this, but like community and thinking of your campus as this community center, and it's like, how can people access this campus we have in ways that are not incongruent with our mission, and can be an extension of it, for revenue, but also for goodwill and community building, which to me, again, has a very real financial return to it. It's just not necessarily immediate or direct.
What you just described reminds me of an episode that I did almost at the beginning of the podcast series with David Sullivan, who's at Spark, which is the auxiliary
Oh, cool.
revenue
Yeah, yeah,
group.
yeah.
Before he joined Spark, he was the head at Breakwater School up in Portland, Maine. And over a period of years, they kind of leaned into the model that you just talked about, where they had obviously the academic day program and everything that was happening inside of that. But then they had a very robust after school program, not only for their kids, but for kids from the entire community. So they were literally running buses to the local public schools, bringing kids on campus, which, as you can imagine, it was probably a really good thing for enrollment. But then they invested into adult education. And so they kind of leverage all of their assets, as we've been talking about, and made meaningful impact in the community through this adult education program. So much so that it became such a dominant part of their organization, that all these three facets, that they reclassified themselves as like a learning institution versus a school, because now like they're serving a broad range of constituent groups. And I just always thought, like, look, this isn't going to be the thing for every school, but certainly there are lessons inside of that we can apply. And like, as you're talking, like what the unlock for me was, you're saying, hey, look at the capacity usage of the classroom. It's 20% over the course of 24 hours, 365 days out of the year. Like, how can we get that to 30%? And what might that do on a revenue side and the impact that it has on the school?
And I'm going to, again, just totally make up an example. This is not coming from any school
Sure.
I've been affiliated with. I'm just making it up. Let's say, all right, we want to be a 500 person school, 500 students. And we're looking at enrollment and we're going, realistically, it looks like we're more of like a 450 person school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of schools in ratio that are kind of looking at it going, we're seeing some enrollment softness. Well, as opposed to, there's incredible people like Tom Shepard that can help people look and be smart about how to find more tuition revenue. And yes, and how else can you be thinking about, managing your portfolio where, all right, if going forward, we're going to be a little smaller, how do we, to your point, as was it David, you said,
Yeah.
how you can lead differently and go, okay, if we imagined the dominant part of our portfolio being tuition revenue, and we're just not seeing it, as opposed to sitting up at night and just kind of ruminating on, why did less third graders enroll? What else can you be thinking about that gives you that protection? And that's where I love thinking about, back to that tuition dependence, whatever that needs to be and whatever you model that out, then outperform that, and some schools that can be 110%. Cool. And they've got all these reserves. Some schools are going to look at it and go, based on what we're trying to do, we need some profit centers in our portfolio outside of tuition revenue if we're going to really deliver the mission we want to.
I did this episode a while back on anti-fragility, like how do you build anti-fragile organizations? And it really speaks to what you were just talking about, which is optionality, right? Like if one thing dips in one year, you have enough bets out there in the market that can compensate for whatever losses you're seeing in that individual area. But if you're not making those series of small bets, you're actually making yourself a more fragile institution because you're not able to weather the storms the same way. And, Gardner, what this brings to mind for me is this idea of like risk and what is our risk tolerance, and are we going to try to mitigate risk as much as we possibly can. But I know when you hear that, your mind goes to, well, if you're going to try to mitigate all the risk, that may actually be a riskier strategy in general. So I'm curious, like, talk about what you mean there.
Yeah. And again, as you think about it through this, again, playing out this portfolio manager thing, the Big Short taught us a lot, right? You can't put a lot of bad investments together and call them good investments.
Right.
That said, there is a correlation in the world of portfolio returns, of risk and reward. And the idea of having positive returns without any risk is not realistic. In other words, as independent schools, if you're going to charge tuition for what you're doing so because what you're doing is distinctive, it's valuable, you have a value proposition. If you're going to be valuable, there's parts of that where you are taking on risk because you are being bold, you are being distinctive, you are doing things that stand apart. You're not just like the school down the street. You're doing things that are uniquely yours. Your mission is being delivered in the way that is uniquely yours. And there simply is risk in that. Again, how you manage that risk across the portfolio, where you feel like each of the decisions were sound and will have a positive return. Some of those returns will be immediate. Some of those will be indirect and take some time.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And that's the investment that you were talking about.
Bingo. And some of the, some of the investments won't end up holding the thesis and won't be as strong. But that gets into the blend, and some years you need auxiliary revenue to be stronger because you saw some softness. Okay. I would guess, and you're talking to a lot of schools, we're living that right now, back to just the amount of uncertainty in the system. Our country's at war. I mean, there's a lot of things that probably have some schools right now ruminating over enrollment softness, and like, okay, solve that as best you can. And what are other ways to be looking at your portfolio management, given that, okay, you're not seeing that part of your portfolio perform the way you thought it would?
Well, let me kind of frame it a different way for you, because when we talked before,
Yeah.
like, you just described a school that may be experiencing enrollment softness, and the instinct would be, well, okay, well, how do we fill those seats? Like, we've got to fill those seats. But I think what you are suggesting is, like, well, maybe you should be asking about, like, what is the actual product that we're selling? So, when a school has that kind of, seats versus product, like, what does that conversation look like as a leadership team if they're going to take on that question?
I'll give you an example from my previous experience at Freestyle Coach Day. Community of learners. That was in the mission statement.
Yep.
All right. So if we lift that out, I never did this exact thought exercise, but it holds. And a lot of schools could go through this. All right. It's in our mission. Well, who's the community? Do we mean full-time students? Do we mean full-time students and their parents? Do we mean full-time students and their parents and our staff? Do we mean alums too? Do we mean the greater community? Do we, and you start playing that out. It's like, well, okay, you're running a through 12th grade school, but you see an opportunity to do summer programs that are life skills like personal finance for your recent graduates as great alumni relations. And, you charge a modest fee, like that kind of thinking that kind of does a few things at once. It's congruent with being a community. It's congruent with being a community of learners. It's great alumni relations. It makes money. So point being, there's ways to just tease that out and go, okay, we've been identifying ourselves as a K through 8 school or a pre-K through 12th grade school or whatever.
Yep.
But what we're really about is lifelong learning. Okay, well, we say lifelong learning a lot. Well, why do we stop offering programming at 8th grade then if we talk about lifelong learning? What are we doing to have adult learning opportunities in our learning spaces in the evenings? Or what, right? I mean, that's the fun of the yes and. And I think that's freeing back to, if, sticking with this portfolio language, if the bigger parts of your portfolio aren't growing at the rate you wish they were, how do you look at other parts of your portfolio? just like people do all the time with the actual managing of their investment plans. That
Yeah.
if the Mag 7's not doing what it usually is, all right, look elsewhere.
Yeah. Hey, if a head of school called you and said, Gardner, we're feeling some softness. I'm trying to like cut down on risk as much as I possibly can to get us through this. Based on the conversation that you and what you just described there, how would you approach that conversation with that head of school?
First of all, just kind of the asking the questions back to how they're doing, what's keeping them up at night,
Mm,
and then kind of just context around like what are cash reserves, how urgent of a situation is this? Are you trying to kind of create some revenue streams that just give you more sturdiness, over the next year, or over the next 3 years? Are you really trying to just materially change the weights in your portfolio back to being a learning institution? So there's a lot of just context that if you're trying to um, look at something and say, all right, the brainstorm really at the board level now is we really are trying to figure out something that we think can bring in, again, just making up numbers for example's sake, $250,000 in revenue over the next 12 months to help us balance the budget. Okay. Why that amount? Why that time frame? Okay. Let's just get clear on what the goals are. And then, okay. So you need things that are actionable sooner rather than later. So, all right. And then, go from there. So I'll give you an example. How many schools run summer programs? Lots. How many schools run programs over their 2 or 3 week winter break? Less. Well, could you, if you're looking to do something dynamic? Because if you're running some half day things or full day things, get back to like markets, that might be really appreciated because parents are still going to work and it's got a different flavor. But you can have winter camp just like you can have summer camp. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying, like, does that line up with the problem you're trying to solve? Are you looking for a quick opportunity?
yeah.
I'll give you an example from 20 years ago. Some teachers at the school where I was at the time did a New Year's Eve sleepover, like a lock-in.
Hmm.
It was a massive hit because think about that. The kids get to have a fun time together. The parents get to have New Year's Eve, and it made money. Now, it's not going to solve the 250,000, but again,
No.
what are you trying to, if you're looking for 10,000, hey, that puts a dent in it. I mean, it depends on what's the problem you're trying to solve.
Well, what I appreciate about it is it shifts your thinking, right? Instead
Bingo.
of, like the deficit thinking more into the investment thinking, which I think is what we really where we started this whole podcast.
I think that's exactly it. And back to checking in with heads of school and back to the naming convention of heads of school, you can be so in your head and
Yeah.
just kind of like stuck on like, I've got to find more students. I've got to, get the admission person to do 2 more open houses or whatever, and like fixate. And to your point, it's like, okay, maybe. And let's take a breath. Let's zoom out. Let's see the big picture. What's possible? And to your point, that reframing hopefully lets you exhale and say, this isn't binary of do this and win or don't and lose. It's like, all right, what's the third way? Like what's another way of thinking? Yeah.
Yeah. Gardner Barrier Consulting. This has been great. If somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So my website's gardnerbarrier.com. On it, you'll find my contact information. My cell phone's even on it. And please just, email, call, text, whatever. And I'd love to learn more about what you're up to and how I can be helpful.
Yeah, and I will make sure to have a link to your site in the show notes. Gardner, this has been great. I appreciate you. And for all of you who are part of Moonshot Lab, hang tight. We're going to have the extended version of the interview in just 1 second. But before we do that, Gardner, thanks again. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.